Hi, my name is Darby Maloney, and I'm honored to be interviewing Sally Field for the Television Academy's Archive of American Television Living Television Collection. And we are in Los Angeles, California. The date is March 22nd, 2004. Okay. All right, well, we're going to start with about 10-15 minutes to talk about your early life and influences, starting with what was your full name at birth?
Sally Margaret Field was my full name at birth.
Okay. Did you have any nicknames as a child?
Not really, kind of. Missy was one that was around when I was really little, and sometimes my taller, she's not older, my younger sister, who's very much taller than I, so I think she's older. She'd kill me if she heard that. It still calls me Missy. Yeah, it calls me Missy girl.
And what is your date of birth?
November 6, 1946.
And where were you born?
I was born in Pasadena, California.
Did you grow up there?
No, my grandmother always lived there, so I always had a connection somehow with Pasadena. I loved it. I still like it. It's a great place. But I then subsequently, I grew up in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley, when it was really just all orange groves, and it was before the freeway. If anybody's familiar with the San Fernando Valley, I mean, the freeway is central to what the valley's about, but I lived there when it was really very rural. It was fabulous.
What kind of neighborhood did you live in?
Well, it was a very undeveloped neighborhood. It was a lot of land. Everybody had walnut groves and orange groves and avocado groves, and a lot of horses around. And it changed quickly, even in the time that I was there, with more developments coming in. And I grew up in a what I call a working class show business family, which was a very important way to grow up if you wanted to be an actor, because working class actors are absolutely the hardest working group in, certainly as far as actors are concerned. When I mean working class, it means they go from episodic to episodic television. They get, on a Wednesday night, they get a show, and they have to show up on Thursday morning, and it's really a very, very hard life. And you never know after you finish that job when you're going to work again. And my stepfather, who was a stuntman originally, they say one of the finest that ever lived. He was Errol Flynn, stuntman, and Randolph Scott, and all these great people, and great pieces of footage he has of him doing sword fights or whatever. He also was a kind of television star, and that he had a television series that was ripped out from under him when the big turnover in CBS happened in the 50s, and all of this kind of television history that I would hear as I was growing up in this environment. And so one minute we had a house and a nice Cadillac car, remember? The top came down and all that really good stuff, and a swimming pool. And then the next minute they say, I'm sorry, you don't have that anymore. You're going to have to move to this little house down here. Because my stepfather just got caught up in thinking that what he had this very minute, because he had this television series, is what his life was going to be. And when you grow up in a working class acting environment, you really learn to trust the fact that you can't trust anything, because what seems like tenure ain't. It's a struggle. Every day is a struggle. If you don't love the struggle, then go do something else. So we moved around a lot. Even though we didn't move states, because we had to stay within our town, because it's a one job town. We would go from a really great house to a little tiny tract house, and I learned a lot of important information early on in my life about being in show business.
What was your stepfather's name?
My stepfather's name was Jock Mahoney, or O'Mahony, really. Sometimes he used O'Mahony, and sometimes he used Mahoney.
Now, just going back a little bit, what was your biological father's name?
My biological father's name was Richard Field.
And what did he do for a living?
He sold pharmaceuticals. Isn't that weird? Actually, probably was. And I think when he was in the Army, he somehow got into that detail where he worked in hospitals and made sure everybody had the right pharmaceutical equipment, and then he moved on, and when he brought it back to his home in Los Angeles. And that's what he did all of his life, but I think he was a frustrated actor. I think he, when he was in college, he grew up back east. I think all of his family, were frustrated artists, dancers and pianists, and he was on all the theater there in the University of Pennsylvania, and I think that was in his soul. But growing up in the kind of family that thinks that being in the arts is tantamount to being a beggar, which it kind of can be, he just didn't pursue it, and always, it was an unanswered
longing.
Yeah.
Was that something he'd articulated to you, or you sensed that?
It's something that subsequently I've sort of uncovered in trying to know who he was. I never really knew him very well, even though I was around him a lot as a child. I would go. I was a product of divorce, as they say, and I would go and visit him on. At first, it was like every other weekend, and then it was less and less as I got older and older. But I never really knew him. I don't know that I ever really had a conversation with him, a real one, where really people talk about who they are. And I was too young to really know how to engage him in that level. And so I never did. I missed that opportunity. So, tried to uncover who was he? What would I have found out about him had I been mature enough to really seek it, need to know it.
You mentioned your taller younger sister earlier. How many siblings do you have?
I have two. My older brother, who is by the same parentage. Richard Field is his father, along with mine, and my brother's name is Richard Field. And he is a physicist. He's one of the finest physicists in the world, actually. He's amazing. And my sister, Princess is her name, who is the daughter, need I say, the daughter of Jock and my mother.
And what's your mother's name?
My mother's name is Margaret Mahoney, or O'Mahony, Field and O'Mahony, and she never really dropped the Mahoney, even though she tried. And so my sister Princess, who's 6 years younger than I, because she's Jock's daughter, and Jock was 6'4", and my father was 5'8". I'm my height, and my sister is almost 6 feet tall.
Wow. Now, what did your mom do for a living?
My mother was an actress. She was like I say, the real working class. She would go, I remember, and she would have a job on Bonanza, or she'd have a job on Perry Mason, or whatever she got that week. And there would be many months where she didn't work at all. But when my mother was really young, or when I was tiny, and she was obviously very young, she the way this all happened for her, she didn't study to be an actor or any of that. She was very beautiful, and she was discovered at the Pasadena Playhouse, just sitting there. And they put her under contract to Paramount. In those days, must have been fascinating, both fabulous and horrifying times for actors. They put her under contract, and then she studied there. She studied voice, she studied dance, she studied movement, and she studied classics with Charles Laughton. Wow. And I remember, in this oblique way, she would carry me around and work on Cherry Orchard, and work on, some Shakespearean plays. She was working on whatever it was. And I actually still have these little books. I think they're Viking. They're about this big, and they're hardback books of Chekhov's plays, or the various things she was working on. They're all marked up. And she was being coached and directed by Charles Laughton. What an amazing man he was, because he ran the acting classes at Paramount. At the same time he was acting and directing and doing the things that he was doing.
Now, how did her career affect your interest in becoming an actress?
I think it was just early on in my house that she appreciated, she wanted to be an actor, and not just a working actor. She wanted to be an artist. And that meant something different than what my stepfather did, who wanted to make money, who wanted to be a star, who wanted to be up in lights. And she didn't want any of that. She looked at it as an artistry, as some way of expressing human behavior. And I think Charles Laughton was the one that started her thinking that way, of taking a great piece of work, be it by Chekhov, Tennessee Williams, or whomever, and interpreting it your way, and that acting is an art. And early on in my life, when I first found a stage, which wasn't until I was in junior high, it just transformed my life. It changed my life, because I had a place that I belonged without even knowing really why. But I'm sure my mother's longings, I felt, strongly reverberated in me.
Mm. Did her longings affect you in a way that was different from how your stepfather conducted his career? What was kind of the dual influences there? It sounds like.
Well, I think ultimately they both influenced me strongly. I think it was good and important information to see. I wanted very much to be what I saw my mother longing for. But even beside that, it was what I felt when I went on stage and knew that I could express parts of myself that I thought weren't acceptable any other place. Mm. And I was a little girl growing up in the 50s in a very stringent environment that the 50s were, even if you lived in a liberal household, which I didn't. I lived in a very conservative household. Women were only allowed to feel 3 or 4 colors. Mm. And beyond those colors were really not acceptable. You were bad, And my grandmother, who was from the South, if you got angry or you did certain things, she'd say, "Don't be ugly." Now, don't be ugly. So all of the feelings that made you human, that you were alive, whatever they would be, the anger or sexuality, were ugly. Don't be ugly. So the place that I first felt I could actually let some of these things out and not explode or implode was on stage, because you'd be angry or you'd be outside of yourself and people would applaud. They wouldn't put you in your room and tell you you're not coming out again until you know how to behave. They went, wow. And even if it hadn't been for an audience, it was that the first times that I felt this odd and delicious euphoria of being out of body, of no longer being connected to your ego. Something took you that was larger than you, and you went with it.
Liberating.
Yeah.
Now, you participated in the Columbia Pictures Actors Workshop. Mm-hmm. What was that?
Well, I went to Birmingham High School, and in those days, was now the early 60s, even though my brother, who went off to Berkeley and, obviously was a 4-point and on his way to being what he ultimately became, no one really said to me, "Sally, are you going to college? What are you going to do here after you finish this sort of schooling that you're getting?" I was barely surviving in school. My grades were so bad that I used to have nightmares about it, and I only went to the drama department and was possessed with it. Ran the drama department, couldn't get enough scenes up and plays to do, and sort of told everybody, okay, now we're going to do this, I want to do theater of the absurd, and I want to do theater in the round, I want to do children's theater, and I was a crazy person. And no one said, "Don't you think you ought to go to class? You're not going to do very well ultimately. You know, you have nothing to do when they say in June everybody's graduated. I had to go to night school to graduate because I couldn't. My grades were so bad. Then when I did graduate, I thought, oh, what am I going to do? The only thing I know how to do is just go to the drama department. So, and I was so unsophisticated. I'd never been on an airplane. I'd never been out of the state. I knew nothing of the world. I barely knew how to read, except plays. I'd read every play because I'd read it really fast to see if there was a scene I could make out of it. Isn't there a scene in here somewhere? It's a great way to read the great works of Shakespeare. You know, that must be a scene I can make out of this damn play. You know, so I didn't really know what my dreams were. I didn't know that I really wanted to go to New York. I didn't know that I really wanted to go to college. I didn't because I didn't have a family that supported me in that. They didn't know how, I guess. So I said, there must be a workshop. There must be someplace I can go. This was during the summer because I thought, well, I could only see then, at that time in my life, about a month ahead. I couldn't see any further than that. Couldn't look much further than that. So my stepfather said, well, I happen to know one, and it was located at Columbia Studios, called the Film Industries Workshop, which, it's the good and the bad news of it. He knew about it. I'm not really even sure how he knew about it. And I had to do an audition scene to get in. So my mother and I did a scene together from Toys in the Attic, Lillian Hellman's play. And I'm sure I didn't have any idea what the play was about, but I did the scene, and the workshop itself had a panel of people that watched you to whether you were going to get into this fabulous workshop, which it wasn't. And all of these people were casting people, which I didn't know. So they were casting people from Universal and from Columbia Pictures, which was Screen Gems. Television was their, the division of television for Columbia, and several others. And the next day, I think it was, I had a call from Universal because they were doing a pilot called Tammy. And I went, oh, goodness me, what is this? I did get into the workshop, and the first or second night I was there, I didn't have an agent or anything. I just was a kid. I was waiting on the corner for my brother to pick me up because my stepfather wouldn't let me drive, even though I was 17, I believe, at the time. I was 17, yes. And the casting man from Screen Gems Television, Eddie Foy III, came by and asked me if I was Jock Mahoney's stepdaughter, and I said yes. And he said, did I want to come on an interview tomorrow? And I, oh my gosh. I mean, I was this little Gidget girl, so, you know, I was like, yeah, yo, golly, yes. Blah, blah, blah. And I came on the interview the next day with my stepfather, because he came with me just in case there was something fishy. And I walked into this room with all these, like, beautiful girls that had, you know, folders, things with pictures, and I had, you know, a wallet with some pictures of my friends, and I was standing by a car. I had nothing. You know, and they gave me some pages to read and said, would I come in and read this? And I was too young and too full of myself because I had run the drama department at Birmingham to be scared. I was just too naive to even know that I should just be a nervous wreck. I wasn't a nervous wreck. Sure, I'll read this, you know. So I read these pages that they had, and everybody just sort of sat there. And then they kept having me come back all summer. And when I went on the interview, I remember I had my beach bag with me and my bathing suit in it so the day wouldn't be a total loss. You know, I was going to the beach afterward, meeting my girlfriends, we're going to the beach. And it was for, you know, needless to say, the television thing that I was reading for was for Gidget. And after months of testing and doing a screen test where I walked on and said, "Golly, which one's the camera?" And they went, "Oh my, this is going to be interesting." And I remember in late August, I think it was, September, I got the role.
Now, describe a little of the premise. You've conveyed some of the character already, but give us a little of the premise here.
Gidget.
Yeah.
Well, I think Gidget is now one of the archetype characters, I think, for women. Certainly of that generation of the late 50s and 60s. Has she? Probably she's had some influence that's trickled down to today. Gidget started as films. Sandra Dee was the first Gidget. And I, even growing up, just thought it was like it. She was a girl that was not the prettiest girl by any means, was really little, and was sort of overlooked by everybody because she didn't look mature and sexy and all that stuff that girls wanted to be or thought they wanted to be. She just was a real girl. And she got caught up in surfing and to be one of the guys. And so as a result of that, everybody fell in love with her. Not really, just Moondoggie, her guy that she always wanted to be with, the cutest one. And isn't that like every girl's dream, that the cutest guy will like fall in love with her, not because she does anything, but because she falls in love with something, an art, a craft, a sport, and because she's really herself, that he likes her over the really pretty girls. I think if we really analyzed it, it's probably a very, very demented demeanor. I mean, I think the whole thing is, or maybe not. I don't know. I haven't really thought. I'm sure there are people who've analyzed the whole character. So then they made the television series out of Gidget, but they did some key changes in it. At least they were key for me, certainly in my life. And they made Gidget, the television series, wasn't really about the same things the movie was about, in that it was this girl that was caught up in surfing. That was really the backdrop. I think the main thing that Gidget was about was a father-daughter story, and that was huge for me in my personal life. To be able to, my first acting experience was about a relationship that was so lacking in my own life. This father, played by Don Porter, who was so loving and so supportive to his little girl, who was 15 and a half. And that was the series.
And talk a little about what it was like, your relationship with Don Porter on the set. How was he to you, Sally Field, not just Dad and Gidget?
He was remarkable. He was a wonderful, wonderful, loving man, and it wasn't a very nurturing environment, I have to tell you. Don made it so. And there were some directors that came on. Bill Asher, who was Elizabeth Montgomery's husband, was wonderful, a wonderful. He had done a lot of the beach party movies and was subsequently doing them, but he was a really nurturing, good man. And it was very hard work. And I remember when I was first hired, the producer, whose name was Bill Sackheim, was a real character, but not exactly a fathering kind of figure. I mean, I think the first thing he said to me is he looked me right in the face and he said, "You know, you can't change your mind." I didn't know quite what that meant. Ever? You can't change your mind. I think he thought I just wasn't going to be serious about it, and that after I got going with the show, that I would turn into this little whining baby that wanted to go home after 14 hours of work or 15 hours of work a day or whatever, especially because Gidget was in every single shot. And this was not 3-camera work. These were filmed. So we were, 5 days a week from, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock calls till it was dark at night. And so what? I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't love it more. I wouldn't go to I had a little funny motorhome. It wasn't even a motorhome. I couldn't stand up in it. It was like a little round thing. And I mean, I am so short, so it must have been, I don't know where they found this thing that was like called my dressing room. And I never went to it, not only because I couldn't stand up in it, but because I would never leave the set. I just needed all this information. I needed to be there. I needed to understand this environment of how to work in front of a camera and all that was happening. And Don Porter knew how hard some things were for me, because I would get embarrassed a lot because I was new and young and adorable, but I couldn't tell what was laughing with me and laughing at me. And I didn't read all that well. I mean, I read. I subsequently, I keep saying subsequently. I love that word. I love how it rolls around in your mouth. But anyway, since then, I certainly have, become very literate and read a lot and made up for things I think I didn't get in school. But when we'd sit around the table and have to read, I would be very, very frightened that I would lose track, and I would be slightly dyslexic. I would read things backwards, and I would come to words that I now know are very common words, but I had never heard of them. Mundane, that I would even remember what these words were. It must be that these were traumatic moments, and I couldn't read the word. And people would laugh at how I goofed up and didn't do it right, and I would try to cover for it. And it just was like, ooh, just like a boulder in my chest. Because to be Gidget, I had never done anything before, I had to be so out there. I had to be so confident that I was fine, that I was enough, that here was this girl that was. I made a lot of faces, and I'm so energetic in it. When you look at it, you need to go lay down after you see it. It makes you like tired. But Don sat next to me, and after we'd done this a few weeks, he knew, and he read me and what I was feeling, and he would say the word. He would say the word before I said it. If it was a hard word he thought, or he felt me hesitate. I remember we had a show that symbiotic, the words, I didn't know how to say it, I didn't know what it meant. And I do now, but I remember him saying symbiotic and giving it to me. And he was always, without being disrespectful to me, because he would be the first one to applaud if I did something good. But he also was kind of quietly there, making sure I didn't get hurt.
So it sounds like he was a really important presence, given that the larger environment, you weren't sure whether you could trust it or not.
I was so guileless. I loved acting so much that I didn't care if I got hurt. But he, I think, worried that it would hurt me, and in a way that I wouldn't be able to keep track of why I was really there, that I loved what this thing was that I had found in my life.
Now, do you have a favorite episode of Gidget?
I don't think so. I don't remember them all that well. I remember doing pieces of them, and sometimes the ones I remember doing maybe didn't even turn out to be the best shows. Not really. I liked doing the ones that had the boys around the most. But those weren't always the best ones.
How did you feel when it was canceled?
Devastated. I was devastated, especially because in those days, in today's marketplace, a show that was what it was would not have been canceled. It would have moved it. In those days, once you got a time spot, they never moved it. They never tried it someplace else. And when it went into reruns in the summer, television had a very strict way they did things. You ran the episodes. You never had a repeat. You never, unless they were taken off the air for a week because some special came on. You really had to have a new show every week, and so you made 36 to 38 shows. And then you came in the summer, and everyone had reruns in the summer for a certain amount of time, and then the new shows started exactly on the same day in September. So what happened is when Gidget went into summer reruns, the kids found it. It was beginning to grow, but then it went into the top 10 over the summer, and they had already canceled it. So if it had been today's marketplace, they'd have picked it back up again, and they'd have, had a little bit of a lag time, but they'd have moved it or done something. But they didn't do that then.
Excuse me, I think we have to stop tape.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did you do after Gidget?
You know what? I think I did a movie in there, but I can't. The timeline. I can't remember if I did The Way West in
You did.
between Gidget and The Nun.
You did.
Okay, there
Yeah.
I did. This movie came my way, which was really a dreadful movie, but
The Way West.
it was called The Way West, but it was sort of the tail end of a genre of movies that were being made. But it had some really fascinating characters in it. Again, it was very important in my development as a person and an actor. It was Richard Widmark, Robert Mitchum, Kirk Douglas. And it was a wagon train movie. It was really stupid. Not a good story, and I learned a lot. What I learned is that I didn't know enough at all, and really frightened me. I didn't like the way it felt, so it was important for me.
You didn't know enough about acting or
I didn't know
life?
enough about acting. Well, life, yeah, I'm still feeling that. But, certainly as an actor, and I think I started to feel and see glimmers of what I really wanted.
Now, also in that time, you appeared on the Hollywood Squares during its debut week.
I did.
What do you remember from that time? And
I think I did Hollywood Squares several
You
times.
did over the years.
It was really fun. I barely sort of remember. I don't remember doing whether it was the first episode or not, but I remember doing Hollywood Squares. I remember doing the dating game, even, on these weird things they'd ask you to do. I just remember sitting there thinking, oh God, I hope they don't pick on me. I can't think of anything funny to say.
And how about Hey Landlord? You had a recurring part on that.
Yeah. That was also interesting. I mean, that group of people who made that, Jerry Belson and Gary Marshall and people that went on to be hugely successful. Who else am I thinking of? Anyway, they wanted to bring me in. Hey Landlord wasn't doing well. I don't know if they thought it was after Gidget had been canceled, and Gidget started to be popular, and they thought, well, they'll bring this girl that was off the canceled show that now is becoming popular and no one knew what to do with it. So they stuck me in there. I think I did 5 episodes or something, and it was wonderful to do because it was live. It was, live in that it was 3 cameras, so there was an audience, and it was something I hadn't done because Gidget was filmed. And fabulous characters. And I remember Richard Dreyfuss had been on one of Gidget's, was his first show, first thing he'd ever done. And then they brought him back, and we worked together again. And it was the first time he'd done 3 camera. And he and I were we felt like, the new kids on the block. And it was really great. It was a kind of broad physical comedy that I had done a lot of broad comedy in Gidget, but this was even more broad. Oh, it was Jim Brooks too. Brooks and Burns were in on it, who later wrote the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and Jim Brooks. They were also writers on this. So it was this amazing group of landmark television people.
What were your hopes for that part? Did you want to stay on that, or?
No, I didn't really have any emotional connection to it.
Mm-hmm.
I really was kind of learning, and I just threw myself in the ocean and was swimming around, I hope, and it was just a great experience to have, but I don't think I felt any real emotional connection to it.
What do you think was the most different working with a 3-camera versus the 1-camera you'd done on Gidget?
Well, I felt more freedom.
Mm.
I think you feel more like it's on stage, and so I felt more freedom with the physicality of it. What I had tried to learn and was beginning to learn on Gidget is the parameters of the camera. A lot of actors find it difficult, and one of the things you really have to learn is how to work with a camera. You can be the finest actor on the planet, but if it's lost somewhere between the relationship of here and there, it doesn't translate. I mean, there are ways that you learn to use that piece of equipment without it really eating into the realness of your work that you take into film. But it's technique, it's camera technique that you could only learn by doing it. You can only learn camera technique by living with it, by having it up your nose all the time when you don't feel good and when you don't want to say things and when you want to go home and when you have things to, material to do that you think is garbage, and when you have material to do that you think is brilliant. There's only one way to learn it, and that's just Miles in the Saddle.
And when you did The Way West, was there something about a film camera that was different? Well, like what first struck you about acting for film versus the TV you'd done?
Well, I think the first thing that you're struck with is the time, how long everything takes, and especially because it was a wagon train movie and everything took forever because there was 47 wagon trains and 150 horses and mules and children and dogs and oxen, and to set up another shot took 45 minutes. So what take one. Okay, let's just move right ahead and go into take 2. Well, 45 minutes later, an hour later, you get to do take 2. So you really don't get. Can you just get a run on this? Can you get the feeling of, get your energy up, get it going? And that's, another part of making films as opposed to television, as opposed to theater, is that you have to learn how to incorporate that into the work. That it takes so long. You can do one little scene for a week, and it's really hard. It's hard to stay in the moment. It's hard to stay in the logic of where it is you are in the story.
You mentioned when you were doing that film, it helped you to sort of sense what you wanted to do next with your career. What were your ambitions at that point?
I don't think I ever looked at my career like what I want to do next. I never really had a clear enough idea of what is next. I only could see what I want to be, and then what would come next, you would just hope would fall in your lap, come at you, that when you were ready for it, it would be there. So I think what I began to know is that I had to be the kind of actor I wanted to be. I had to have a deeper facility with myself, and I didn't know enough then to know, I was still so unsophisticated, that there were places that I should be going to, that there were things that I should be seeking out for myself. And ultimately, I didn't know enough to really know how to follow the dream.
Now, your next big role was Sister Bertrille.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get that role on The Flying Nun?
Well, it's like one of those, it's just a roundabout tale. They had asked me to, Harry Ackerman, who was producing it, who had produced The Nun, and who is legendary television producer of sitcoms in the 50s and 60s. And they had found this piece because they were looking for something else to put me in because Gidget had gotten so popular. And ABC wanted it. That's where Gidget was on ABC. And Harry Ackerman wanted me to do it, and I didn't want to do it. I was now turning 19, I think. And I didn't want to be a nun. I did not want to do this. And like I say, I started to see these other dreams of what I really wanted to be. And I said no. I said, I don't want to do this. No, I don't want to do this. And I felt I needed to have faith, have courage, and go after something nebulous, because I had no clear vision of how you went towards these things. And I said no, and then I had even moved out of my house and was living in my first apartment, which was, 5 minutes away. It really moved away. But I didn't have courage enough or experience enough to know that I should have moved all the way away. I should have gone to New York. I should have had strength enough, faith enough to do that. But I didn't. And one day my stepfather, Jock, came to my apartment, and Harry Ackerman had called him after I had turned this pilot down and turned it down and turned it down and turned it down. And each time I turned it down, it took strength to do it, because there was something in me that said, oh, I'm frightened to say no. I'm frightened to be myself. And my stepfather came over and said to me the crucial words, but you may never work again. He said that. He said, if you don't do this, you may never work again. And then Harry Ackerman had called him and said, please talk to me. So it was kind of like a traitor in my own camp. And maybe it wasn't, because that was all he knew. I mean, Jock, that's how he lived. I mean, you didn't become an actor. You just earned money. If there was some money offered, you go and do it. And even though really, in terms of money, it wasn't even really very much. I should have been smarter and had a bit, had an agent who would hold out for more if they wanted me so much. But I chickened out. I called them then. I got scared that maybe I would never work again. Maybe I wasn't worth anything. Maybe I really should just be glad I have a job and that this should be fine. And from the minute I decided to do that, something in me just curled up in a ball and wept because I didn't want to do this. And they were already shooting the pilot, and they had started shooting the pilot with somebody else, and I didn't know that. Well, how would I know that? And so they halted production on the pilot and let the girl go and brought me in and for the pilot. And I always, certainly tried to do my best with it, but deeply didn't want to do it. And it went for 3 years, and it was a hugely important, probably, time in my life, because I learned a lot, because I didn't want to do it, and because I hated it every day. I hated the garbage. I mean, I felt it was just trivia that I had to say. The Gidget, there was some kernel of something real in it. It was the father-daughter relationship that I always could hang on, but there was nothing in The Nun that I could make sense out of. It made no sense to me. It was just drivel. And people, when they hear me talk like that, they get very angry. Oh, I grew up with that. I loved it. Well, God bless Gesund that you loved it. But it was drivel. and nonsense. There wasn't any piece of it that had any human behavior in it. And that bothered me. And I one time had a meeting with Harry Ackerman, you know, and he would ask me to come to lunch with him periodically. And I said, and they all sensed that I was terribly unhappy. And I would, you know, I think at one point I gained a lot of weight. And it was all of the typical things that being 19, 20, 21. And the drug culture was coming in. They were scared to death that I was going to like turn out to be some sort of junkie in the corner or smoking dope or doing God knows what that everybody else was doing. Why shouldn't I? But I was never really into that. But Harry Ackerman took me out to lunch, and I said to him, I could just be happy if I knew every once in a while, every fifth show, there'd be one scene that was really about human beings talking to each other about something that human beings talk to each other about. And Harry said to me something that I never forgot. He said, people don't want to see that. People don't want to see that. When they tune in each week, they want to know what they're going to see before they see it. They don't want to be touched. They don't want to be surprised. They don't want to think. And I went, I don't believe that. I don't believe that's people out there. I would go around and go to personal appearances and talk to people, and they were just like me. I just didn't believe that. And I really believe that was a 50s mentality of situation comedy. The kind of brilliance that Lucy was. The reason I Love Lucy was so brilliant is because Lucy and Desi were brilliant, and the comedy was breathtaking. It was classic clown comedy, but it wasn't about anything. And I wasn't that. I wasn't going to do the Chocolate Factory. They weren't, even if they'd have given me something where I could try to, maybe I could conquer that. Maybe I could understand that kind of physical comedy. But there wasn't anything for me to sink my teeth into. So I would create little games for myself to stay alive. The games I created was I wouldn't memorize anything, and sometimes I wouldn't read it. It would keep myself from being massively depressed. So I would walk on the set, and I would look over the script guys, and there's this wonderful man that was in with me on this, and I would look over his shoulder, and I would memorize it instantly. And sometimes I would have like speeches. I'd have a monologue, and I would see if I could just memorize it instantly. Okay, I got it. And what that did, without knowing it, I was giving myself tasks that were hugely important. Is that memory is a muscle, and the more I was using that muscle, I was making it do things that it didn't want to do. It gave me a facility with memory and with things that can get in the way of actors that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. It gave me having to be in front of the camera in 24 hours a day in all aspects, and it gave me a certain concentration. I didn't want to have to do another take again, so it gave me I learned a kind of concentration that if all the sets caved in, I'd still be doing the scene because I didn't want to have to do it again. So ultimately, probably it was a very good thing, but it was on an emotional level, it almost did me in.
Wow.
But, except for this, I met a woman named Madeline Sherwood who played the Mother Superior, and that was maybe the Dawn Porter counterpart, because she recognized my depression and how difficult this was for me, and she recognized why, and she took me to the Actors Studio. And I didn't know that's where I needed to be. I didn't really know about the Actors Studio, and it became a huge turning point in my life. And so I would be doing The Flying Nun in the day, and I would be at the Actors Studio at night doing, Sartre's Respectful Prostitute. It was the most schizophrenic life, and it's what kept me alive.
Yeah. We'll talk a little more about the Actors Studio, but about The Flying Nun, how would you describe the character of Sister Bertrille, this character that you had such an aversive kind of response to, and the premise of the show? I have a sense of what was missing for you, but what was it?
Well, Sister Bertrille was a novice. It began when she was a novice nun who was from Chicago, actually, and was sent to a convent in Puerto Rico where it's very windy, and she was very little. And because of that, with the cornet, the way it was one of kind of made from the French cornets that they wore, that the wind would pick her up and she would fly. And that was it. That was all there was, except that she was a renegade, and she would get into trouble, and she would make the Mother Superior angry. And there was a playboy named Carlos Ramirez who was a millionaire playboy who had a casino, who was sinful behavior. And Sister Bertrille was always in his hair, making him do good even though he really wanted to do bad. And that was it. That was it.
Would you say what made the show popular was kind of what Harry Ackerman said to you that day at lunch, of what people were looking for?
No, I don't think that's what made the show popular.
What do you think people liked about it?
I think there was a religious aspect to it that people really tuned in, because this country has a very large religious community, obviously. I think that's initially what turned them, why they tuned in, because they wanted to see something they thought was wholesome, that had a Christian aspect to it. And ultimately, I have to say, I think it was me. I think that as awful as I thought I was, I do think that there was some raw energy that I had then. And untrained, and I think I appealed to people my age, and others, but primarily because I felt like I was like every girl. I felt, when I would be with a group of girls my age when I would go to, personal appearances, I felt I could fit right in. Tell me tell me about what you're doing, and I felt connected, and I think they felt connected to me. And I think that was part of it. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what it was. It'll come back.
Now, how come it was ultimately canceled?
I think the era came upon us. A couple of things happened. That's what I was going to say. We were also now entering it was now 1968, 1967, 1968, 1969. My generation was exploding. The world was changing. Vietnam was a very big deal. And The Flying Nun was at odds with what my generation was doing. And I felt really torn by that. I wasn't political yet. I was beginning. But, it was Woodstock and dropping acid, and the Love Generation was in high gear. And I wasn't a part of it, and I felt very ostracized and spit upon by by the people who I wanted to be part of in my generation, that I could see I was a part of the establishment, and a repulsive part of it. Organized religion was being thrown out at that time, and it was a very hard and confusing time for me. I think The Flying Nun stopped because it was time for it to stop. I think the show had no place to go. It never had any place to go. And there wasn't anything you couldn't. I don't know how it made through a third year. I mean, how many times can you jump up and down in the same place without digging yourself a deep, deep hole? And there was no place to go. There was nothing to do. And I was tremendously uncooperative then. I certainly was professional. I showed up. I was there. But I was uncooperative. I wouldn't go. They were very frightened of me at that point. The Monkees were right next door. They were shooting right next door. So in was coming this next generation of the Partridge Family was on one side. The Monkees was there, and they were really frightened of the Falling Nun and the Monkees being right next door to each other. What was this? And the studio themselves would call me in and want to buy me expensive gifts and things, and if they could tell me what to wear. If, when I was myself,
Right.
They wanted to tell me what to wear. They didn't want me wearing mini skirts, all of that stuff. Number one, I weighed 400 pounds as far as I was concerned. I was like what every girl does at 19. I hated myself. Like, just thought I was the most disgusting piece of poop that ever walked. So I was like really hesitant to put on those miniskirts, but just because they said I couldn't, I see pictures of myself in lime green tights, and like little tiny miniskirts. Even in my skinny days, I was like, what were you thinking? But they wanted to dictate to me who to be and what to wear. And when I went on talk shows, they wanted me to go on talk shows. I didn't want to go on talk shows. I felt very insecure to do that. They sent me on talk shows, and then they tried to tell me what to say and how to be, and then they would criticize me when they thought I wasn't good. And I began to realize that this is like, no, golly Moses, I can't do. And it wasn't even that I had a conscious thought that I can't do this. Part of me couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't do this. I couldn't make my mouth work. I couldn't go into work. And I remember having like a moment on the set where I just began to cry and cry and cry and cry. I have to go home. I kept saying, I have to go home. I have to go home now. I have to go home. And luckily there was a part of my head, a part of my psyche, my spirit, my soul that rose up and took care of me and get me, the rat's hind end, out of there. And so then when they said, you have to go promote the show, I said, no, sorry, I'm sick. I can't. And I didn't promote the show, and I just was pulling out my enthusiasm, my heart. They couldn't have it. They weren't going to take it and trounce on it. So it at the end of the third year, it was canceled. And by then I'd had my first child. So I had my first baby in the midst of this.
Now, how did becoming a mom affect your feelings about being an actress or where you were at that time?
Well, I don't think I think what it did for me as a person is that it gave me strength. Because if I could take care of that child, Peter, if I could take care of Peter, I could take care of myself. And, something in you as a female, when you're feeling, and I was very much caught up in the era I was raised in, not being able to be assertive, not being able to be aggressive, not being able to say no, afraid of not being liked, afraid of appearing, hard to get along with, and all of this, really frightened of that. But something rises up when you have a child that says, you know what, forget it. This is what I got to do, and this is what I have to do now. And that started to change me. And I started to see, I was working at the Actors Studio, I was working with Lee Strasberg, and I started to get some strength that I didn't have before.
What was Lee Strasberg like?
He was remarkable. He was many things a lot of people have heard about. He could be devastating to people. But he was so important to me. So his focus and the information he gave me and how he worked with me, and ultimately how hard he was on me. He was as hard on me as he was on other people that I saw. But it was really, he did it right at the right time, right in an important way to shake me up enough to not get comfortable, even behind just a little bit of progress or sureness that I had, a confidence that I had of my acting. It was important that he shake it up, that he not allow me to have that. He was very important in my life.
I think we'll take a break now.